Hello Lee, Tel here. Just watched your video on the EDL and their banning of their march through the 5 boroughs of London. Thought it was quite interesting. Thought rather than try and use up a 500 character limit, I'd just do a video on it, presenting my take on it and why I think the conclusion that was probably brought up was to ban all the marches, because if you look at the story, it's not just the EDL. Any march going through that area has been banned for the next 30 days. That includes the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street, where the communists took on the fascists in a street battle throughout Cable Street in the 1930s. Before we start the argument proper, if any of your so-called friends on here or elsewhere calls you a racist or whatnot for saying these things, then I'd be the first in line to disagree with them. I don't think you're endorsing racism, or it can be argued you're endorsing the English Defence League at any point. I think what you're doing is taking the literal interpretation of libertarian. Literally, the fact that the price you pay for living in a democracy is allowing certain people you can't stand the right to freedom of speech. But that's not necessarily the point here. That's just I think your reasoning behind it is that anyone who wants to say something should have the right to say it. Doesn't mean you can put a blanket ban on things. But let's move into the argument proper. Now, the story as it stands is that Theresa May, having considered all the legal tests of public order, has extended a ban for Tower Hamlets, Waltham Forest, Newham, Islington and Hackney on September 3rd for 30 days. Because the Metropolitan Police fears there would be violence and disorder. Now, normally these things are done on police intelligence, monitoring forums, monitoring chat rooms, agents that they have within the organisations themselves. The Metropolitan Police has said in the story on the BBC that it's received specific intelligence that led it to believe serious public disorder, violence and damage could be caused in areas where the marches would be present, and banning the rallies would be the best option to prevent that. Now, it's not all completely gone away. If you go on the mouthpiece of the English Defence League's sort of rank and file, Casuals United, their post that they've put up is that the EDL demo in Tower Hamlets is still a week away, that they have a static protest going on at Tower Hamlets, urging all the people on their side to put aside their differences and come to Tower Hamlets, which kind of puts a bad light on the English Defence League, really, because if they can't agree amongst themselves who can be in charge and who can go down there, then what does it mean for the unity of the rest of the English nation? I think another thing that's come into consideration is, of course, the elephant in the room, the riots. Now, on Casuals United, the English Defence League say that they're being persecuted for the riots. I don't think anyone has feasibly said they're going to persecute the English Defence League. I don't think anyone's considered that the English Defence League are the reason for the riots. No one's persecuting them over the riots. They have this total victim complex about this kind of thing. But the English Defence League, I think, were pretty much a non-entity until about 500 of them turned up in Enfield and agreed to sort of police the area, when, from what I heard from most locals, they just sort of stood around in the streets, generally looking a bit leery. But the other thing you've got to consider in London at the minute, Lee, is the cost, the sheer cost of that kind of operation. The London riots have already cost us millions. They're going to cost us millions more in clean-up. I'm going to put a link to a story from the Lancashire News on the BBC that the protests that were held in a protest that was held in Blackburn by the EDL was costing Lancashire Police £500,000 to police 2,000 people. So, and they had to close shops, corral the road. You know, this police force is having to save 42 million over 4 years. They could have done without having to spend 500 grand on a bunch of football hooligans holding up signs about Islam and kicking in windows. And if people want to come and say, oh, we don't all kick in windows and whatnot, I have a report that I will also put a link to from the Network for Police Monitoring, which states the following about a protest in 2010 in Leicester. EDL supporters travelled to the meet-up points on foot and walked through loose police cordons, stopped and searched. In the absence of ban on processions, EDL could have marched the short distance from the meet-up point to their rally site. They had to lay on 2 buses to shuttle EDL supporters to the rally site from the pub. The buses made a number of journeys. It's not clear how these buses were funded, but the EDL don't appear to have done it. So it looks like the taxpayer was paying for the EDL to have their pissed up members ferried from a pub. Significant disorder occurred during the process of moving supporters from the pubs to the rally. Pub windows were smashed. On an arrival at the rally site, busloads of EDL attempted to break out of the area. EDL supporters were loosely escorted to their buses. Some groups broke away, engaged in skirmishes with local Muslim youth and caused damage to fast food restaurants. So they go around smashing up things, starting fights with people and getting drunk. This is not, I can understand your point, Lee, that everyone's got the right to say what they want to say, but this is not the mark of, a brilliant protest movement. This is a group of drunk, people who can't stand Muslims for whatever reasons. I'm not getting into the politics of the EDL on this one. But they're causing hell in these areas. Leicester Council, with the report I just cited, £850,000 is the final bill that they had to spend to deal with an EDL march. This is the other problem you'd have had, which has now been muted by the fact that all marches are off, is you'd have had them other people frigging unite against fascism. I mean, they're just as bad from another direction. They're just as ridiculous. They turn up, they start yelling, you need more policemen to keep them in, you need more policemen to keep the EDL on the other side, and you just end up with policemen keeping 2 groups of people apart. And you can't have that. You can't have that the whole time, especially when we're stuck halfway through building up London. I could go on. There's another story I've got here. Dewsbury in Yorkshire. 40 minutes the EDL were out on the street. It cost the police £172,000. We can't keep spending this kind of money keeping these people safe. And that is what we're doing essentially, because they go into these very volatile areas, these areas of sort of high diversity with regards to population, predominantly Muslim areas, and they start trouble. And, you can't have that, Lee. It's too much money at the minute, especially when we're having to put out for the riots. It's, I'm sure they took into account the freedom of speech and whatnot, but you have to bear in mind the English Defence League is not a political movement. It is a bunch of street protesters. I mean, this is not a group that necessarily believes in freedom itself. I can put on the links as well. The last thing I'll put is the statement from the National Union of Journalists that has called on the police to take tougher lines on the English Defence League, because the English Defence League has threatened National Union of Journalists members while they're reporting on marches. It says here that Median Daira, Al Jazeera reporter and National Union of Journalists member, was threatened by the EDL whilst trying to do his job. They attacked him and screamed, "Al Jazeera terrorist jihadist." National Union of Journalists member Mark Valley was attacked and threatened by leader of the EDL Youth Division. Mark Valley said professional photographers have been subjected to violence and intimidation by right-wing thugs whilst documenting EDL protests. Journalists should be free to go about their lawful and necessary work without such targeted intimidation. These threats are designed to silence the media and stop photographers showing the true nature of the EDL. To which Casuals United had said, "Whinging left-wing idiots, you want to film the protests for hostile purposes, you accept the anger, you clowns." Now, if you want to know more on the EDL with regards to some of their other activities, I can point you in the direction of Coughlin 616 and the Coughlin 000 channel. Richard Coughlin is fantastic on the EDL. He's done a lot of work on them, more than I've done, and he could really help flesh out parts of EDL policy where you might need them, where it could show that this might not necessarily be the best political group to speak for the opponents of Islam. But that said, those are some of the few bits and pieces that I think are the reasons that the government has curtailed all rallies, not just the EDL. They'll make it sound like it was just them, but it was every other rally going on as well. So, yeah, but I understand your viewpoint, mate. ElPresidenteTel. Love, peace, liberty.